And the guy pitched me his deal, and I said, okay, I'll take it. The first thing I thought is, I got to get a gun, because mobile home parks, from everything I'd seen, are terribly dangerous. So I went down to the gun store, bought a gun, and I got a concealed handgun license because I was obsessed with, I could not go to the park without a gun.
A great book can totally challenge your conventional thinking and change your life for good. However, some of us just don't have the luxury of time of sitting down to read a book. But there are some instances in which we do have that time, and these are perfect times to learn. So we can learn while driving instead of jamming to the same music on the radio, or maybe at the gym. Well, now you can. Dwellynn has partnered with Amazon's Audible to give you, the Dwell listeners, a free book. Yes, a free book. So all you have to do is go to audibletrial.com/Dwellynn and download your free book. This will also be in the show notes. You can click on the link. And if you don't have a book in mind and you say, Ola, I don't actually know where to start with. Well, awesome, because I can tell you one to start with today. It's a quintessential classic. It's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. So download Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and that would basically just take your mind on a different spin. Of course, I'm always open to hear from our Dwell listeners. So email me at ola@dwellynn.com, and then feel free to also give us a rating and review. This really helps us to rank better in iTunes. I can't wait to hear from you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Frank, for joining us here at the Dwellynn Show. I really, really appreciate your time. I'm super excited to jump into today's conversation.
Sure, absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
So just a really brief introduction about Frank. Frank Rolfe has been an investor in mobile home parks for about 2 decades and has owned and operated hundreds of mobile home parks during that time. Frank, I would like you to elaborate a little bit about what you do and kind of what you've been up to lately.
Yeah, absolutely. We're right now, my partner Dave Reynolds and I, we're ranked 5th largest in the U.S. as far as ownership of parks. So we started that with just one park each about 23 years ago. And basically what we focus on, our territory is kind of what are called the Great Plains, which is Texas to Canada, and then the Midwest. And it's a very simple business model. We buy underperforming mobile home parks, and then we turn them around and raise rents, fill lots, fill homes, and clean them up and make them nicer to live in and reposition them. And that's our basic model. So we currently have about 20,000 lots. So we probably serve about 60,000 customers. But we started this thing up from one property each. So we've done all of this just one property at a time.
Wow. So if there's a Dwell listener listening on our conversation and they're thinking, wow, you're one of the largest mobile home parks in the United States, and you literally just started with just one mobile park. So maybe we should just start with that very first park, kind of what got you into the real estate investing game and how did that start?
Okay. Well, it's a strange story. So I'll give you the short form answer on that. Basically, I went to Stanford University, and I got a degree in economics. And back in those days, anybody who went to Stanford was considered a loser if they didn't go to graduate school. So you had to either go into law school, medical school, or business school. And so I pass out the sight of blood, and I get bored reading. So it had to be business school. So to go to Stanford Business School or Harvard Business School, or the really good business schools back then, the number one way to get in was to start a business and then write an essay about the business. So that's what I set about doing. So I gotten out a year early by taking extra classes. So I had one entire year to start a business and then sell it off or shut it down and use that on my application. So I asked different parents, what should I go into? And they all said, you should go into billboards, because it's weird. It's not people intensive. You can build a couple, and that would make it for an interesting essay. So knowing nothing about the industry, I started building billboards. And at the end of the first year, I only had 3 of them, but I had 7 pending. So I decided I would finish those 7 the following year and then apply to business school. But of course, by that time, I had built the 7. I had 10 more pending. So 14 years later, of just building a billboard or two every month, I was the largest private owner of billboards in Dallas-Fort Worth. I had about 300 billboards. So I sold to a public company in '96, and I built 2 billboards on a mobile home park in Dallas called Glen Haven back when I was doing the billboard thing. And I called the guy up, and he sold me his mobile home park right there on the phone in one phone call. I just called him to ask if the mobile home park industry had opportunity in it. And he said, why don't you find out yourself, because I'll make you a deal you can't refuse. And he sold me that park for $400,000 with only $10,000 down. And he carried $390,000 non-recourse for 30 years. And that's what got me into it. And I knew absolutely nothing about it at all. And I basically figured it out as I went. But that's how I got into it. It wasn't pre-planned. It was basically me just trying to find something new to do with my time. And it was just basically that completely that random.
Oh man, this is so good. There's just so many things in here, Frank. First and foremost, when you finish out of Stanford, you just wanted to have a business so you can have a good essay to write to probably go to, graduate school. And then you did this thing, you built it really, you got really big, 300 billboards. And then you kind of stumped into mobile home parks that you didn't really know much about. So there's so many things I would love to touch on, a lot of serendipity, I would say. In today's day and age, what you hear about on podcasts is, educate yourself, which is obviously a great idea. But for your first park, Glen Haven, you didn't know anything about it. In retrospect, do you think that worked for you in terms of while you were managing that asset? Was that a plus for you that you didn't actually over-educate yourself in mobile home park investing?
It wasn't, because back at that time there were no books or the internet or anything, right? So there was nowhere you could go to get any information, and even if you went anywhere, there wasn't any information. So the only information you had was what moms and pops would tell you, and their information was really bad. So it's probably a good thing I didn't talk to moms and pops, or I would have done all kinds of terrible, stupid stuff that they do frequently, much of which is illegal or doesn't work. So it's probably good I didn't listen to anybody else. Of course, at the same time, I made a lot of really stupid mistakes in the early years because I didn't know what I was doing. It took me years to figure out what the heck I was doing. And I was just really, really lucky as I went that I didn't screw it all up. Because I had some real amazingly stupid decisions, but probably would have been worse if I'd listened to the other guys I was buying out, because they would never follow fair housing, fair debt collections acts or anything. They were basically just moms and pops who built the things from scratch, but they had no idea. And then they were in a different era of time, because most of these people were born in the 1920s, 1930s.
Fascinating. Okay, so the next part I'd like to jump on, which is owner financing, seller carryback, seller financing, whatever we want to call it. First and foremost, somebody my age might be thinking, "Oh my goodness, you bought an asset for $400,000, only 10% down. I'm sorry, $10,000 down, and the seller was more than willing to offload this asset to you." Can you just tell us a little bit more about that story and a little bit more of what happened?
Yeah, well, what happens, and it's really common in our industry, is seller financing. And let me explain to you why it's so common, though, because people think there's so much seller financing because there must be something wrong with the assets. That's not what's happening. What's happening is most of these moms and pops, they own these things free and clear, right? So it's very, very, very rare you buy a mobile home park where the seller has debt. So since they own them free and clear, every penny you give them, they're going to pocket. And what happens is right now, and ever since 2008, so for a decade now, we've been going through this period called quantitative easing, where the interest rates were very, very low because the government forced them to go low because of the Great Recession. So CDs, even today, CDs are only going to pay you, like a one-year CD will only pay you a jumbo about 2%, right? And we pay on a seller note 5%. So a guy is going to get 2.5 times more money on his interest rate carrying the note than he would get if I pay him cash. But then on top of that, the way the tax laws are, if I give you the money in cash, you have to pay about a third of it in tax day one. But if you carry, you only pay the tax as you receive the principal. So you actually earn interest on what would have been the tax. So the bottom line is, let's just model this for a second. In other words, if I bought a mobile home park from a guy for $500,000, the payments to him, I'm not including any tax calculations, but the payments to him, if he carries a finance, would be $25,000 a year. And if he just put it in a CD, he would only get about $10,000 a year. So it's significantly more advantageous for them to carry the paper. And then the other thing is, when they carry the paper, they don't have to get a bank involved. And when you get a bank involved, they perceive that you're going to have all this scrutiny of their financials and everything else. And they normally don't have very good financial records. So it causes them less stress because they control all the pieces. But seller financing is very, very common. That's what really got me into the industry, to be honest with you, because since I didn't know what I was doing, the seller financing was crucial, because not only did it mean I didn't have to go to banks and borrow money, but on top of that, my worst case scenario in all my early parks was that the whole thing blew up. All I was out was my down payment, which is traditionally very small. And so that's kind of how it worked. As far as that first property, his down payment on the first property was only 2.5%, which is a tenth of norm. And the reason for that was that property was losing money. And so he felt like he had to make it really attractive for me to buy it. And I'll tell you why I was losing money and then how I fixed it, because that's crazy stupid. What the guy did was he was losing about $2,000 a month with the park. And the reason he was losing $2,000 a month, well, there's three problems. Number one, he had 83 lots. We only had 40 occupied. That was problem number one. Problem number two is his lot rent was only about $150 a month, but the market was about $300 a month. But the third one was, the one that was causing him immediate loss every month, was he had at some point given everyone in the park free cable television and no charge. And when I looked at what he had done, is he called up the cable company and he bought free cable, and he didn't ask for a discount. So he was paying 83 times the standard rate for residential, no commercial discount, and he was half vacant. So he was paying 2 times per lot more than what you would pay if you just called him up yourself. And so when I canceled that agreement, that took it from negative to a positive, just that one item. But that's kind of how it works. I mean, basically, seller financing is a win-win for everybody, because the seller gets higher interest rates and better tax treatments, and the buyer doesn't have to go through the banking sector.
Wow. I mean, Frank, there's just so much going on here. There is just a lot going on here. I mean, you mentioned that you didn't really know much about mobile home parks, or kind of what you were doing anyway when you were starting out. But I mean, just the 3 value add that you just mentioned, occupancy, market rate, amenity, like, the free cable stuff. So just 3 items, you were able to see that quite clearly than the seller, right? Because that's what you saw, and then you went in and you quickly changed it. So I love the first idea about the canceling the free cable. But what did you do about the occupancy and the remaining 40 lots?
Okay, well, before I got in the mobile home park business, I had my billboard company, and the billboard company is very, very hard to rent ad space. So I was having to make about 100 calls for every ad rent I would get signed. So I was used to chasing customers. So when I had the mobile home park business, I just assumed it was the same story, that I was going to have to chase people to try and get them to move in. But when I read my first little ad in the newspaper, my phone rang off the hook. So what I learned pretty quickly was there's huge demand to live in mobile home parks, and the huge demand comes out of people who live in Class C apartments. These are people that, they don't like people knocking on their walls and ceilings. They want to have a yard. They want to be able to park by their front door. They want to know their neighbor's name, and they want to be a homeowner. So I found that demand wasn't the problem. The problem was, how do I harness that demand? So, if I have houses in the park already, I can fill those instantly. But then the problem is bringing in houses to fill it. Well, on my first property, what happened was they shut down another mobile home park near downtown Dallas. And so I went to that owner to see if I could get some of his customers. And he told me that not only would he give me as many customers as I wanted, but he would actually pay to move them, because that was part of his agreement with the city when he got rezoned, was he would pay to move the homes out. So that one transaction basically filled my park up. And
wow.
And then today what happens is there are programs to fill vacant lots that come out of 21st Mortgage, which is owned by Warren Buffett, and they'll bring you a brand new home and install the home and the skirting and the stairs and the whole thing free. And then what you do is you run the ads and show the home and sell the home, and then they finance the home. But the bottom line is, in our industry, if you have any vacancy, it's either you did a bad job when you bought the mobile home park and you bought it out in the middle of nowhere where there's nobody who wants to live in it, or you failed in getting homes into your vacant lots, because the demand is crazy. We have parks right now that we get 100 calls a week from people cold calling us looking for homes for rent. So
wow.
it's very hot. I mean, the whole affordable housing sector of real estate is extremely hot, because, as you know, there is no affordable housing. It just doesn't exist. And so if you've got it, there's a whole lot of people that want it. So the filling stuff is not that hard.
So Frank, as a multifamily syndicator investor, I'm like jumping out of my skin, because like everything you've mentioned, I mean, just the fact that you went to the mobile park that got shut down, and the owner is like, not only would I give you all my tenants, but I'll also pay. I mean, these are like unheard of in the multifamily space, right? But my question is, my question is, why is mobile home investing not as sexier as apartment building investing? Well, I mean, what do you think?
Well, the problem is there's this huge stigma, and I'm as guilty as anybody, because when I bought my first park, Glen Haven, when I got off the phone with the guy, and the guy pitched me his deal, and I said, okay, I'll take it. The first thing I thought is, I got to get a gun, because mobile home parks, from everything I'd seen, are terribly dangerous. So I went down to the gun store, bought a gun, and I got a concealed handgun license, because I was obsessed with, I could not go to the park without a gun, a loaded gun in my
I'm
pocket.
laughing so much at the background, yeah.
Okay. So that's kind of the deal. The problem is, if you look, and this is the weird part that I did not know till later, if you start studying the history of the industry, and there's not a lot of books on it, but there actually is one little book I found at one time that gave the history of it. But, people, I know you won't believe this, but in the 1950s, the demographics of people in a trailer park were higher than stick-built houses, because the people in the trailer parks were mostly people on the GI Bill, because a lot of colleges put trailer parks, in fact, the government did at the end of World War II. So the people in the trailer parks were all people who were going to law school and dental school and medical school, and they were just out of the army, and they were kind of freewheeling. And Elvis Presley himself lived in a trailer park in 2 different movies during that period. And in fact, Elvis himself owns, I don't know if you saw at the auction recently, but he actually owned a mobile home that he kept behind Graceland, and he actually preferred living in the mobile home than in Graceland, right?
Wow.
But so the industry used to be super upscale, and then in America's mind, it went down the drain, because the media totally changed what they did with them. So you went from Elvis living in mobile homes in the 60s and in the 50s to, movies like 8 Mile with Eminem, where he lives in a trailer park. It's all nasty. And Pink Flamingos, the show Trailer Park Boys, the show Cops, the show Myrtle Manor. So the media has sent the stereotype into every American's minds that trailer parks are nasty stuff. And as a result, like multifamily people, I mean, apartments, everyone knows what they are. Everyone's all respectful about them, even the low-grade ones. People are like, oh, it's apartments. You can stay at a cocktail party and it's sexy and everything. But you can't do it with trailers because everyone has this terrible stigma against it. And no matter what you do in it, you could be dealing in the most luxury coastal mobile home parks known to man, and people still, when they hear the word mobile home park, they just think it's gross. That's what the problem is.
Wow. Okay. I mean, definitely a lot of good history there that I didn't even know myself. I think that's really fascinating. The other thing, I don't really want to over-focus on Glen Haven, but I'm just really curious because that was kind of like your start in the game, right? And some of our Dwell listeners are people just starting out or trying to figure out where to start out. So you took over this asset, you quickly recognize, how you could add value, and you made some assumptions, based on your experience in the billboard industry and into this new industry that you've gotten into. Somewhere right, somewhere not so right. Management is a big thing. I mean, you talked about, getting a gun, right? How did you clean up the park? How did you manage? Did you get a third-party property management, or did you take that on yourself? And if you did, how did that go?
I self-managed. I went out there and I officed out of the park every day from 9 to 5 for a year. Okay. Just to learn the business, because I didn't know. I don't do it today. Today we only visit our parks typically twice a year. But on that very first park, I didn't know what I was doing, and so I would go down there every day to try and learn the business. And my partner Dave, on his first park, he went out and lived in it. Okay. But what you find is, first thing I found when I went to Glen Haven was my stereotype was all wrong. I didn't need the gun. It wasn't dangerous. I had some crazy customers, but they weren't scary, crazy customers. So the first thing I had to do was I had to decompress from a stereotype. And basically what you'll find when you manage a mobile home park is very simple, because you don't own the homes, you just rent the land. So you don't have to like fix the toilets or any of that junk. So basically I didn't have anything to really do all day. The only big thing I had to do was collect rent. And the way we collect rent today is we call the system no pay, no stay. If you don't pay, we evict you. So again, it's pretty simplistic. It's pretty much like a paint by the numbers painting every month. But that's the big thing any park owner manages is collections. Because even though the people aren't really scary and they're not really nasty, they don't have high incomes. And so you have to stay on top of them to get paid. That's like the big item.
Gotcha. And what about having the bank systems, using those kinds of innovative techie payment systems? Does that work, or you still have to do the old collect?
No, it works. It works in some states where the customers are more affluent and more techie, but like in a lot of places, a lot of our customers do not have bank accounts, right? And when you don't have bank accounts, a lot of those automated things go out the window, right? Because most of our customers pay with money order, and so when you have a park where everyone's paying with a money order, the only systems you have are you can have them mail the rent into a PO box, or you can have them put the money in a drop box or hint to the manager. So you can't really do any of that sophisticated stuff. Now, we own parks where, yes, you can do sophisticated stuff. And even with money order, if you train the customer properly, you can have them do direct deposit of the money orders into, your bank account. But it's not, I mean, our industry, because our customers don't make a lot of money. I mean, our standard customer works in the fast food industry. They're not really heavily into computers. So a lot of that automatic withdrawal stuff, that doesn't work yet. If you wait another decade, it probably will, because in probably another decade, everyone will be forced to pay their bills online. And But for right now, that stuff is not available everywhere.
All right. So the last question on property management is, if there's an investor thinking of getting into the game, right? But they don't really have the autonomy to manage these assets themselves. Do you recommend them, getting a third-party property management company?
No, I don't. If you talk to park owners, you're going to find out the average park owner only spends 4 hours a week on their property, and that's nothing, right? I mean, 4 hours a week, that's about 30 minutes a day. So all you have to do is you have an on-site manager. That's the big item you have to have. Every property has to have an on-site manager. And then once you have the on-site manager, they do all the day-to-day stuff, because it's pretty simplistic, because again, you don't own anything but the land. So all their day-to-day stuff is basically looking at rent and making sure the mower showed up and stuff like that. And then you manage that. Now, the one item you will have to have, if you don't know how to do like QuickBooks, you'll have to hire someone to do the bookkeeping. That's the item you have to have, because you cannot let your financial statements be screwed up.
Right.
But it's not something where you really, in other words, like, if you have apartments, you got to have a really hardcore management company, because you're having to do all these repairs, right?
Right.
But in this case, you're not doing the repairs to anything, because you just own earth. So there really isn't that big a job there for anyone to do.
So you did a fantastic job with Glen Avon. You cleaned up the park. I read a little bit. I read a little bit about you, and you got the asset to where it should be. And then you decided to really grow this thing. What was that story like, and how easy or hard was it to scale up? After you knew kind of what you were doing with the first asset, at least.
Yeah, well, what happens in a lot of people in the mobile home park business is it's lucrative enough. They don't really grow much beyond just a few mobile home parks, because that's like as much money as they want, and they quit. So our industry is hugely fragmented. I mean, of the top 100 people in the U.S., the number 100 position, all you have to have is 700 lots, which in some cases would be just 3 mobile home parks. So it's like most people in the industry own 1 mobile home park. Some people own 2 mobile home parks. We just got a little crazy because I guess because I came out of the specter of building up my billboard company, and my partner's also pretty aggressive. We just didn't stop after the first few. So we've just kept buying and buying and buying. But you don't have to follow our example. I mean, our portfolio is now approaching $1 billion, but there's really not a reason you have to grow like that. I think we're fixated on growth, but you don't have to be as fixated as we are. There's nothing wrong with owning just 1 mobile home park. But as far as scaling it up, obviously when you scale to our level, because we have about 400 employees, then you get into whole new challenges of people and stuff. And I'm not even sure you're happier as you get larger. You're probably happier when you're smaller. You don't have all the same problems with people and stuff. But as far as scalability, what makes our industry scalable is that it's very, very attractive to banks, because no one buys these things for cash. Everyone buys them with debt. And what's really odd about our industry is you would think that because we're so weird, that banks would be turned off to it, but actually banks are very much turned on to it, because we have the lowest default rate of any real estate sector. So I can go out and borrow money from any bank, all the way from small town banks all the way up to giant lenders like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, on outrageously attractive terms and pretty easily. So that's another thing you'll find in the industry is, even though the average American hates mobile home parks because they don't know any better, the banks love mobile home parks because we have a very low default rate.
Fascinating stuff. Yeah, this is just really, really fascinating. Okay, so you said about $1 billion in assets now. Do you see any stopping you guys? I know you're pretty aggressive in your growth strategy. Is there any stopping you? And also, is there any diversification in mind into some other asset classes?
Well, as for the second question first, the answer is no, because we are a pure play only mobile home park company. So that's all we do. And so it's unlikely we'll ever change that because the banks don't really like the stuff to be intermixed. So basically, we just do mobile home park, and we'll probably always just do mobile home park. But as far as our growth, even though you may think that we sound large, we're there's other people out there who are large, other people out there who are technically growing faster than we are. So I don't know at the end of the movie where all this ends up with who's in what position, but there are more than just us out there. I mean, we are fifth largest, but the fourth largest owner is twice our size, and they are owned by the country of Singapore through something called GIC, which is the Sovereign Nation Fund of Singapore. It's basically Singapore's credit. They have a, just like we have a national deficit, they have a national surplus, and they invest that surplus through a thing called GIC. And then there's a guy that's in third position, which is almost double their size, and that's part of a Canadian REIT, real estate trust, actually an apartment real estate trust out of Canada. And then you've got the guy number two, who's twice their size, and they're a U.S. public REIT, and the number one is also a U.S. public REIT that's headed by Sam Zell, who's a famous real estate guy. So, we are very unlikely to be the top of the market because we're not at the top of the market now ourselves. So there's some pretty lofty competition there.
So technically, from a pure private perspective, you're number one in the country, technically.
Yes, we are the largest non-publicly traded or publicly held company. That's correct.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Frank, I wish I could keep going. I want to ask so many questions, but we're definitely dwelling into the quick rounds. These are going to be quick questions and quick answers. You ready, sir? First question: what makes Frank unique, or you can say MHU? What is that differentiating factor that separates you from the next guy or the next girl?
Probably the fact that I do at least the MHU stuff, my writings and stuff, for fun. So since I do them for fun, I can say anything I want because I don't really care. So I just tell people the truth, and then they do with that what they want to do.
Second question: what was the last book that you read, and what was the one thing that you picked out from that book?
Okay, well, I'm going to flip that around a bit and say if you're going to read one book on real estate, I would read The Man That Bought the Waldorf, the story of Conrad Hilton. You can't buy it at Amazon, but you can buy it if you go on a company called Abe Books, abebooks.com. It's an old book, no longer in print. It's not super expensive. They have tons of copies of it, but that's my all-time favorite real estate book because it's a rags to riches story. He builds up an empire of hotels that he loses everything. It's a fascinating book. And then he comes back from nothing and does it all over again. So that would be my all-time favorite book.
Never heard of it. Yeah, I have to check that out. abebooks.com. I'll put that in the show notes for our listeners. Final question. You've got, MHU, like you said, you're doing stuff for free on there. You've got business that you're pretty sizable asset that you're managing. What do you do for fun?
Well, I don't do anything for fun, but I will tell you this because I read a lot of stuff, and I read a magazine from the 1920s, and it was they interviewed a guy who at that time was the richest guy in the U.S., but then of course he lost everything in the Great Depression, and I'd never heard of his name before. But in 1925, he had 35 million cash, which today would be comparable to 700 million in cash. And they asked him what his secret was. And his secret was that he doesn't understand when people say they don't have enough time to accomplish things, because the way he looks at it is you have 12 hours a day for work, 8 hours a day for sleep, and you still have 4 hours a day for recreation. And so I thought that was that's pretty accurate. So basically, I work probably 12 hours a day with a day job with mobile home parks, and then I probably sleep about 8 hours, maybe sometimes 6. And then on those 4 hours of recreation, I ramp up my 4 hours where I typically type for fun, write things for about 2 hours a day. But the bottom line is I don't have a lot of time because I'm working almost all the time, and I do that about 7 days a week. So
Wow.
it's not like I do anything crazy. I don't work all night or anything, and I eat properly, I exercise to some degree. But like when most people are watching TV, I'm also watching TV, but at the same time I'm watching TV, I'm typing. And that's what's given me kind of an advantage because I've learned how to use my recreation time to actually be productive.
I like that. I really, really like that. How did you get to read magazines from the 1920s? That's really fascinating. Never heard of that before.
Oh, what happens? See, I drive, looking at mobile home parks that we own, I drive all the time. I mean, I'll often drive 10 hours a day. And when you drive 10 hours a day, if you don't get out and walk every couple hours, you get sick. So what I do is I stop at any antique mall or anything weird that I come across. And when I go in antique malls, I like looking for old books and magazines on business. So I was prowling around an old antique store in, I think, Indiana, and I found 2 magazines I'd never heard of, which was called like National Salesman Magazine, and it was just for salespeople from the 20s. It was giant, like they're like an inch thick, and they're nothing but stories of salesmen on like what's working and what's not working. And that's where I find all this weird stuff, like in the very back corners of antique stores all over America.
Wow, that is so unique. I love that. That is so unique. So if there's a Dwell listener listening on our conversation of Fly on the Wall, and they're like, I really like what Frank was talking about, I want to learn more about MHU. How can people like reach out to you or connect with you?
Okay, it's super simple. If you just go to mhu.com, you'll find me all over that website. That's where I put all my writings and videos and all of that stuff. And you can additionally email me. And I'm probably the only guy in America that just really gives out his contact information. And I get emails from all kinds of people, both people looking to get in the business, people who are already in the business, and then even like newspapers and things. It's Frank, SRANK .Rolfe, ROLFE @gmail.com. And that's my direct email.
Thank you so much, Frank, for giving our Dwell listeners that. I just want to say thank you. I've learned so much myself, and I'm sure our Dwell listeners did too. Really appreciate your time today.
You bet. Thanks for having me.